Ladies and gentlemen, what we'll do in the next half hour is we'll talk about data. And we'll not only talk about data, but we'll talk about big data. I was invited to address the United Nations General Assembly about data is the new oil. And as a matter of fact, in 2012, that 1 year alone, more data was generated than from the beginning of mankind until the end of 2010. Now, it is not the size, it is the motion, as they say. It's what you do with it. And it is not just some edge group somewhere in the valley, but it really affects the world. Amazon, I would argue, has changed the way 1 billion people think about buying stuff. Google has changed the way 1 billion people think about information, about knowledge. Facebook has changed the way 1 billion people think about who they are, about who their friends are, and what it actually means to be a friend. Now, underlying this is that data creation process. Just think back only maybe 50 years ago. When you walked in the casino, all that you knew was the transaction. Now, you know about all the individual interactions online. You know even what leads up to that transaction. And ultimately, it's not about transactions. You know that very well. It is about relationships. And part of my talk will be that I try to show you that our notion of identity, of who we are, how we do marketing, moves from being focused on individuals, on attributes they have, to being focused on their relationships. And not, I hate to disappoint you, not the relationships they have with you as a company, but the relationships they have with each other. Okay, so big data is the mindset to turn mess into meaning. Here's an example of raw data, of data sushi. If we plot that, it will look quite differently. It is my geolocation as Google records it. You can tell from here when I'm home, when I get home, whether I'm home alone or not. It tells you where I work. It even tells you where I eat. It tells you whether I'm late. It tells you whether I'm doing things differently. So that is an example of what I call social data. It's data I decide knowingly and willingly to share with the world. So if you go to Weigen.com, my website, and look there, not only does it tell you where I am, but it even tells you that today, in 3.5 shy hours from now, I'll be in a flight to Beijing. And it even tells you what seat I'm in. So if somebody wants to have an in-depth conversation with me, you know where I'll be sitting. Now, that is the current, and that is the future. Now, let's look at the history. Specifically, I invite you to go to google.com/history and to be surprised about all that Google knows just from your search terms. In my case, there are 15,000 search terms that are recorded. 15,000 websites I went to. Wow. Isn't that a powerful construction of who Andreas is? Now, these are the raw data. And what we need to do is we need to actually refine those data. One data refinery is Facebook. It's actually both a data creation process but also a refinery, where Facebook uses social distribution to reach people. Mark Zuckerberg once told me, Andreas, you as a physicist, I think you have the wrong notion of what people do. You are telling us that the purpose of communication is to transmit information. Wrong. The purpose of the point is that Information is just an excuse for communication. So people ultimately want to communicate, and whatever works is what they use. From Amazon's perspective, Jeff Bezos has the simple rule. In order to help people make better decisions, that is the assumption which we have, help people make better decisions, you make it trivially easy for people to contribute, to connect, and to collaborate. So that is Amazon as a data refinery. And I want to give you here the mindset of what I call the equation of business. And here's how I want to explain that. Different people have different recipes of doing things. Some people might take 3 tablespoons of sugar and 2 egg yolks. Other people might take 2 tablespoons of sugar and 3 egg yolks. So those weights, the weights in front of the sugar, the weight in front of the egg yolks, those weights are their recipe. And if they actually meet the taste of the population, then of course people will get whatever they're baking. If it is not the taste of the population, if they don't have a good model of what people like to have in their pastry, then they're not going to do well. The reason I'm talking here about putting together this equation of the business like a recipe is that it also means that we have different time horizons. That really sweet thing might taste wonderful now, but what if we eat it every day for 40 years? A second on the lip, a lifetime on the hip as it goes. So what are the time dimensions? Do you want to get somebody to spend even more money right now in this session? Or in your equation of business, do you want to tune this down and rather make it easier for them now, give them something now so they will come back? That is your equation of your business. If you get it right, if you have a mental model that corresponds to the customer, good for you. If not, try to fix it. Now, once you have that equation, and Jeff Bezos and I probably spent 50 hours working at Amazon to metrify the different parts of the company. Once you have the equation, then it makes sense to do experiments. You try things, you measure them, and since you have agreed on the equation, you now know whether in the simplest case, option A or option B is better. Now, engineering for feedback, getting fast feedback is the third ingredient here in why companies like Amazon are so successful. I now want to give you one specific example, and that is how customers discover things at Amazon. So for you, that could be, how does a customer discover a new game? And there were 5 stages, and I want you to map them onto where you are in your companies. First stage was manual recommendations. That meant that some expert person figures out that that game follows well that other game. Second stage was using the collective intelligence, the implicit collective intelligence of the customers, of seeing where they click. So if they're exploring and then they go to that game, then you surface that game they eventually go to. That's based on clicks. The third stage was explicit. That as opposed to before, where you wouldn't allow the customer to write anything on the website, now you say, be our guest, put your stuff out, write reviews. And now based on the explicit comments of people, you make recommendations. Fourth stage is to take into account the situation the customer is in. Have they just lost a lot of money, or were they on a winning streak? How does that different situation, that different context they're in, affect of what you should be showing them? Or in the purchasing example, is it that they really want to learn about a certain space of film cameras, or do they just need some gift for their mother-in-law? And the fifth one is social context or social recommendations. And that means that you recommend stuff that the friends of the person have bought. Example for social commerce was a feature we had called Share the Love. Let's say John bought a book. He then, after he's checked out, gets the question, hey John, do you have any friends who you think should get a message from Amazon saying, your pal John just bought that book. And by the way, if at least one of them buys the same book within a week, you get 10% discount, and each of them gets 10% discount. Sounds fair. It was not really about selling more stuff. It was understanding the social graph. The 4 C's of marketing were all squarely hit, which led to amazing conversion rates. Content was picked by John. Context was John just bought that book. The connection is he figured out that Andreas might be interested in that. And the 4th one is it allows us to have an excuse for a conversation. And again, those conversations are not the conversations the company is having with the consumers, but those are the conversations 2 consumers, John and Andreas, are having. Another example in marketing, social marketing, comes from the carriers. AT&T did a very, very careful experiment. They set up the equation of business, and then one group got product recommendations based on traditional segmentation, demographics, sociographics, loyalty data. The other group, and people randomly got to assign to one or the other group, the other group simply was shown products their friends, people who call them, had bought. And it turned out that the lift, the difference between those 2 cases, was almost a factor of 5. So the world's best statisticians at Bell Labs did only 20% as well as pretty simple computer scientists to just say, hey, you're calling him, he bought something, might as well recommend it to you. So what this means for us here in marketing is that there's a shift from defining an audience, age, gender, ethnicity, to looking at the social connection. Not to treat people as a member of a segment, but to treat people as an individual, as a connected individual. Huge effects on business models, not only in marketing. Non-social business models, like Craigslist, where people put up all kinds of stuff to buy or to sell, are being replaced by social business models where the identity of the person plays a role. Example is Airbnb. We were staying at a Marriott property here. Airbnb, where you rent somebody else's spare bedroom for the night. Airbnb offers more rooms than the entire Marriott chain worldwide does. So not a fringe phenomenon. People, because we have identity, you don't want to have a random person stay in your house. You want to know something about them. And they don't want to stay at a random house. They want to know something about you. And that is where these new business models enabled by social identity are possible. So instead of looking just of the person as a set of attributes, look at them as somebody embedded in the social graph. There are new models in insurance, which I hear is sort of the opposite of gaming, called German company Friendsurance, where, very briefly, if I and you decide to be friends, for Friendsurance that is, then for me that means I'm willing to cover any problems you have with your insurance up to 50 euros and vice versa. So just as before, where John bought the book, we are putting our money behind our mouth. And I say, I'm going to step in up to $50 if you have an insurance claim. And maybe we get each another 3, 4, 5 people, a local graph. So the worst that can happen to me is that if you have an insurance claim, that I have to pay 50 bucks. Now, look at the second order properties and see where there are parallels to gaming and to gambling. If I'm dealing with an anonymous insurance company, you know, around the time when a new iPhone arrives, you wouldn't believe how many people are losing their phones. Because they're dealing with some anonymous property there, they're filing claims, and they get the money for a new phone. Now, would I want 5 friends who trust me with their money, and I trust them with my money? Would I want them to know that I'm considering like insurance fraud? No. So you have a change in behavior, as well as reduction of the claims. And what the insurance company, Friendsurance, does for the users is at the end of the year, if there's no claim, they say, we pay you the difference between a low deductible insurance, which you initially had, and the high deductible insurance, which we could get because your friends all were willing to chip in the 50 bucks. So that is just one of the many, many examples, all basically being boiled down to this. 20 years ago, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Now, on the internet, everybody knows you're a dog. Let me give you another example. Google Glass. It is a wonderful example for give data to get data. Now, it is only a deal if it's a deal. But the question, what is the deal that consumers make with Google here? So just to make sure we're all on the same page, Google Glass you put on, and then it projects stuff onto your basically visual field. So you can see that your flight might be delayed, or you go to a party where someone says, hi, Andreas, you of course have no idea who they are. Turns out they have Google Glass, and it has face recognition, and it reminds them that 7 years ago, they sent me an email which I never responded to. Now that is the one side. That is the value which I, as a consumer, get out. Let's now look at it from the perspective of Google. You have now the world's population, everybody who is wearing Google Glass, measure out the universe for Google. They go to the local Corte Inglés and they look at the prices and they report back to headquarters how much the milk costs here and even how old the milk is, or that fresh fish is still the same one which was sitting on that shelf 3 days ago. So basically we now have the world's population, 1 billion people, measuring out the world, bridging the physical and the digital, and reporting it to Google. What do you think about that? So this online offline bridge is one, of course, many companies are interested in. When I talked to John yesterday, he told me that some of the real casinos, if you will, some of the terrestrial casinos now actually have online sections physically located there. So that bridging the physical and the digital really goes very strongly, and it's enabled by us having mobile phones. So the mobile knows more about us than probably our partner. I mean, let's face it, what do you touch more often than your mobile phone? It knows where you are, it knows how fast you're walking, it knows things that 20 years ago were still classified. The quality of voice, lie detectors, you can buy for 99 cents in the App Store now. So the mobile is always with us, and it's a good proxy for the person, but it's not a one-way device where you push stuff to. It is also a device you collect from, and a device that allows two-way communication, give to get. Here's an example from Amazon. With the Amazon app, You can scan a barcode and it will tell you, just as if you're on the website, what the properties, what the reviews for that item were. Now, even more interesting, you can take a photo. And I want to take you through that one because it shows you the deep data strategy Amazon has. Because you're snatching a photo of that water bottle, for instance. Now, the lighting conditions here are not great. Certainly not as good as the lighting conditions in the studio, where they took the picture of the bottle and put it up on the website. So Amazon might have a few choices. And now they use your intelligence with your interest to actually get the information about that water bottle as opposed to that vodka bottle or that whiskey bottle by picking out which of the potential items based on image recognition it might be. So it works for everybody. Give data to get data. Basically, so over time, Amazon builds up a database of stuff to buy, which by far exceeds what any company could create. In addition, it is how objects appear in real life. Give to get. Now, what you should ask yourselves is, does your customer understand what they get in exchange to sharing data with you? Do they have a good notion? In our roundtable discussion earlier, we had a good conversation about the question about whether politicians really represent what customers actually want, or whether some funny notion of people who don't really exist, or whether it is maybe in some cases the ignorance of politicians who have the hope to delete data, which in some way is super expensive, because on the one hand you want to have a record of a transaction in case there's an insurance claim, say. On the other hand, the consumer apparently wants to be able to delete those data, but a copy could have been made. So in some way it's a plea for explaining stuff to people so they understand the trade-offs, that there is a cost of privacy. Are they interested in paying that cost and not getting recognized when they go to the casino as the most valuable customer? Sorry, you're coming anonymously. We can't tell whether you are one of our best customers or just escaped jail. And the second point is, ask yourselves, whatever product you build, whatever service you offer, does your product or service get better over time, get better with data, or get worse? So my laptop, for instance, gets worse over time. Stuff aggregates, stuff accumulates, and it sort of slows down. Maybe only my laptop, maybe not. So in general, that's an example of something that gets worse the more data there is. On the other hand, look at the examples I drew examples from, the companies I drew examples from. Amazon, every click makes Amazon a better company, makes Amazon able to give you better recommendations. Every Facebook post, every reaction you have on a Facebook post, every tag you do on Facebook makes Facebook a better experience for you. And every time you go to the grocery store, wearing Google Glass, Google gets better over time. So those are two questions to ask when you're dealing with end users and data. So I want to end this talk with 4 rules for big data. And while I'm summarizing those, I want to ask you, if you have questions, if there are things that are not clear, or things that you think are plain wrong, do us the favor. There's paper on each table. Write them down. So when Niels and I are going to sit down in a few minutes, we actually have your input. So we can actually address some of the problems which you have. Which brings me to the first of the 4 rules. Start with the problem, not with the data. So for years, consultants have shown up at your companies and told you that if you only get that bigger database, then you'll be in better shape. And these were consultants, get what? Who sell databases. But it's not about the size. It's about the motion. It's what you do with it. So what are the problems you're trying to solve? Try to really metrify them. Try to write down what it means to have made progress on that problem. And then you'll see that your attitude, the analysis paralysis, which you often see, will completely disappear. 2, focus on metrics that matter to your customers, not to your accountants, not to your lawyers, but focus on metrics that try to capture what your customers think about a problem. So, for example, in logistics, if we promise you an item for Thursday this week and you get it on Friday, well, that is pretty bad. What about if you get the item promised for Thursday already a day before, if you get it on Wednesday already? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Who thinks it's a good thing? Get it a day early. Who thinks it's a bad thing? You know, I know that about 20 minutes into a talk, half of the audience has fallen asleep and the other half is having sexual fantasies. So let's try this again. So who do you think it's a good thing if it arrives a day early? Okay, that's about a third. Who thinks it's a bad thing if it arrives a day early? Okay, it's about 2/3. So what we learn from this is that third of people who think it's a good thing, you would have a positive term in a day early arrival. The delivery on promise or the early delivery for you has a plus sign in the equation of the customer. For the 2/3 over there, it has a minus sign. And ultimately you optimize for it and then you'll see what the customers actually like. 3, focus on actions and feedback, not on analytics and reports. So there's this new breed of people called data scientists. And in the old world, the time scale of actually getting things done was very slow. You needed to think about something, a query, then you maybe go to your database guy who pulls some data, and then he brings it to some analyst guy who runs some correlation, all that shit, and then finally, you got to something, and the person said, that's not what I asked for. And you go again through the cycle, which takes days. Data scientists are people who actually have a number of skills combined. Usually they are physicists, it turns out. First, they don't run away from data, but they run towards data. As data, I'm interested in that. I want to look at this. And they go for data sushi. They go for raw data, not for cooked data, let alone cooked books. But then they're also curious. They're data detectives. They love to find stuff out. So let me actually, since I still have a couple of minutes left, let me give you one of the examples where it took me a day or 2 days to figure out what was wrong. And it perfectly translates to the world of online games. So we were curious, how long typically, or what is the distribution of time between first looking at an item and then buying that item? So you condition on the person buying an item, you look back in history and say, when did they first look at that detail page? What we found was that, like everything, it drops off like a power law, which is straight line and log plot. But then there came that hump after 8 hours. So, how is it possible that more people buy an item having waited 8 hours than, say, 7 hours? And I can see you think maybe it's they need to get back home, they do it in the morning, or they want to sleep over it. None of that. Some of our computers were set on Seattle time. Others were set on GMT. And my quick analysis, of course, threw out negative times, that doesn't matter. And I was left with those where actually the 8 hour was an artifact. So many of the things data detectives find are artifacts. But then every now and then we find something which is interesting. And the last point is, let people do. what people are good at. And computers do what computers are good at. Don't confuse the two. Thank you for your attention.